A very warm welcome to everyone who has joined this short webinar from around the world. I think as John was mentioning, the most important thing is hopefully you and your family and friends are all safe and stay safe in this difficult time. The pandemic has only accelerated what I think was a great trend that was ongoing for several decades, the digitalization of economies, of companies, and so on. Digital has been growing exponentially for the last several years, and it is just helpful to actually stop and understand why right now in the last 10 years, you suddenly see a huge impact in the digital trends. So if you just take a linear series for 30 steps, so you begin with one and you add one each time, okay? So add one each year. So 1, 2, 3, 4, you go 30 times. At the end of 30 years, you hit 30, right? So a linear series, you've increased the value of what you have done by adding the same amount each year 30 times. That is quite good. You just take a simple exponential series. So let's say 2 to the power of 1, 2 to the power of 2, 2 to the power of 3. And you go 30 years and you get 2 to the power of 30. And 2 to the power of 30 is close to a billion. So now you start seeing that in terms of digital technology progress, for the last 30, 40 years, things have been doubling every 18 months or so in terms of computation speed. But the impact of the doubling now in the last 10 years has become huge. And this is one reason why suddenly you're finding all kinds of interesting new applications with neural networks coming on board. Neural networks, by the way, as a technology is not new. It's about 40, 50 years old. I did a paper on neural networks in finance when I was in my graduate program at Berkeley more than 30 years ago. But what is different right now is that you have so much more data available and you have so much more computation power available that with these networks, you can do much more. And just the fact that you have more data and more computation power means the accuracy of what you're producing is increasing dramatically. And now the last 10 years, you see neural network systems that are beating the best human experts in a variety of domains that are able to do all kinds of interesting new applications in imagery and like deep fakes and so on. And this trend is going to keep on continuing because there is no sign whatsoever that the computation, let's say, trend is going to slow down. People had thought sometime in the last 5 years that Moore's law, which basically said that the number of chips on a transistors on a chip on the computation power would double every 18 months, would essentially come to a halt because, we're reaching the limits of physically what could be produced in the semiconductor fab. But now what you're seeing is that optical computing and quantum computing are actually becoming more mainstream. So as quantum computing becomes more mainstream, what the expectation is that the rate of progress in digital technologies, in digital computation power is actually going to become faster, not slower. So you're looking at the next 10, 20, 30 years where there'll be tremendous growth in computation power available for cheap. With the whole Internet of Things, with the whole rise of big data, the amount of data available is increasing dramatically. And all these things are shifting the boundaries of organizations, of industry sectors, are causing disruptions in many sectors, including, for example, education. And it is really making it imperative for all organizations and all sectors to look at the digital transformation much more seriously. The pandemic certainly has made it, much more acute. As we have all heard, digitalization has accelerated tremendously in the pandemic. And we expect that this digitalization of companies and sectors and economies will, in fact, keep on increasing and improving over the next few years. In fact, part of my research, I do a global technology index, which is called the Network Readiness Index. So if you do a search for Network Readiness Index, you'll find all the information about it. But we look at different economies and we look at how successful or not so successful are they in deploying the power of digital technologies. And what we see is that within any one income group, so let's say you take the high income countries in the world, some high income countries are doing better than others. And same is true for middle income and low income economies. And the key difference, at least for the high income economies, is more the intensity of digital action or digitalization of the value chains or the operations. For low-income economies, other things also start mattering, like education, like quality of institutions, and so on. But the quantity and the amount of digitalization is very, very important. So it's a trend that I would like to state that we're just seeing the start of it. In fact, the hockey stick curve, where the curve goes up vertically, we are in the middle of that, and we're going to see dramatic changes going forward. Can I have my slides put up, please? So what I'll do is I will share with you very briefly some thoughts. We have a very brief seminar, so obviously I cannot go into depth, but I wanted to give you a teaser into the kind of content you can pick up in this Cornell seminar. And I certainly hope that this will inspire you, this will excite you to come and sign up for the course yourself and with your colleagues. So can I move my slides? Can I go to the next slide, please? I don't know, it's not moving at my end.
Professor, you'll have to go back to the
okay. Let's see.
slideshow.
Okay, yeah, good. So, I have some messages. I'll only touch the first message out here. And I thought I would pick up as a deliberate point the automobile industry. Why the automobile industry? Because essentially the automobile industry is one of the oldest industries in management that has been studied extensively. It's also a very hard industry, a hardware-oriented industry where you produce mechanical cars and quality improvements are so important. Also, automobile sector is the one in which a lot of the latest technologies in management science have been actually applied there first. And I will, not in this session, but in the session in Cornell, I will talk about how organizations are designed to cope with disruptive change, because automobile sectors are facing disruptive change. And I will talk about in the session at Cornell in the program about how sometimes good management leads to poor decisions in the face of disruptive change. So sometimes, you want to do the right things, but you apply a good management theory, and in the face of disruption, it leads to wrong decisions. And also, I will outline a comprehensive digital strategy, why that is important. So let's look at the automobile sector just to begin with. And as I told you, the automobile sector is one of the most widely researched, studied sector. And of course, I could take banking and fintech and other services sector, and you would probably see, in information-based sector, the digital transformation quite easily and clearly. But I think it's very helpful to take the automobile sector and understand a little bit in more depth what is actually causing and how is transformation digitally happening in the automobile sector. So if you look at, for example, automobile sales, a lot of the basic goal of car manufacturers around the world has been to sell new cars, because the basic assumption is that you sell new cars and people own cars. So ownership of cars is what is the ultimate customer goal. But what you start seeing is that the actual sales of new car sales had been stagnating for some time. And in fact, on a worldwide basis, before the pandemic, the global car sales was sliding. Okay, and this is happening around the world, not just only in China and MENA and India, different markets, but I think around the world, by and large, global car sales are declining. Now, this is interesting because while you see the car sales declining, you see the number of miles, the number of kilometers being driven by Uber or Didi or Ola or other similar rideshare companies to be actually increasing. And this is one of the first examples of digital transformation where fundamentally what is the customer need has changed. So if you're a car company, the customer need is, for a long time, you thought it was ownership. People wanted to own a car. And now you realize that because of digital technologies, because of these rideshare companies like Uber and Didi and Ola can in fact use digital platforms to connect supply and demand, the real need is mobility, it's not ownership. And this changes, the whole reconceptualization of customer needs and potentially a reconfiguration of the customer demand in the industry. Because think about it, if for 100 years, you have thought that the actual customer need you're solving for is one thing, ownership, and actually what the customer wants is something else, mobility. This is a dramatic shift. So this is what is happening right now in the car industry, where various car companies are now trying to say, okay, we need to also get and change a mindset around mobility and what the true customer demand is. Now, if you think about one of the most valuable car companies right now in the world is Tesla. And if you go to the website of Tesla, what you see is that, of course, they sell electric cars, but what they're also doing is selling solar panels, okay, for homes, energy consumption for homes. And what they are doing is very interesting. So if you think about why is Tesla so highly valued, more highly valued than many of the largest car companies put together, it's not because that the market sees Tesla as a pure car company. Tesla has multiple faces. One, of course, it is a car company. Second, it's an energy company providing energy to various homes. And third, it's an information services company. Because what Tesla is doing is collecting a lot of information about the car, about where you drive, what you drive, the whole history and pattern of your car usage, and is using that to understand your lifestyle. And if you connect the car to the home, so think about, at least in many economies, where people live in the homes and then they use the car to move across different locations, to the office, home, and so on. The car, in effect, becomes an extension of the home. So now what Tesla is trying to do is trying to essentially become the extension to the home, in which the individual, the owner of the Tesla, can control the home from inside the car, can control the car from inside the home, and can in fact access information services on a more seamless platform across different, let's say, locations. And this is where you start seeing that you're finding two trends happening. So one is the core technology that the car industry thought of was important, engines, is changing to batteries. Now think about it for a second. Engines were the pride of a car company. A car company invested the highest amount of resources, the best engineers designing the best engines, and took part in Formula One racing cars and other kinds of showcases of engine power, engine skills. And now suddenly engines no longer matter, and in fact batteries become the most important thing. Now, a battery-driven car, of course, not only is a different technology, so now the car company has to give up a lot of its investments in engines for over 100 years and move into a whole new technology domain, batteries. But also what you start seeing is that a battery-driven car is actually mechanically much more simpler. So, there are many more mechanical parts in an engine-driven car, and a battery-driven car, the almost 1/10 a smaller number of mechanical parts. So the mechanical engineering skill of a car company is no longer that important now. In fact, with the technology change, you have a dramatic change in nature of the product. And the second thing with the battery technology, what is happening is you're having these autonomous cars with a lot of sensors put inside the device that are actually driving about autonomously. There are, I think, 3 or 4 cities in California where you can actually order an autonomous cab. You order a cab and a cab comes without any driver, and you get in the cab and the cab takes you to where you want to be. And this is something which will spread. It's not going to be rocket science. It is something that is happening already, and it's going to happen more and more fast. But what you're seeing is that the nature of the car is changing, because now you're having so many devices put inside the car is able to monitor your reactions, your behavior, whether you're falling asleep while driving, and is able to take appropriate actions. If, for example, it knows, that, in your home, connected to your home, it knows that your fridge is missing some milk. As you're driving past a gas station or a store, it can give you a prompt. Well, here there's a gas station, you're missing milk. Do you want to stop and buy some milk? Now, these kinds of services are going to become increasingly popular and easy as you have connectivity built across different components. So in a sense, what is happening is these cars are becoming more information platforms on which you can stay connected to the customer historically, and you can actually stay connected in real time. And you can, in fact, provide services to the customer based on what the customer wants and needs. And this is where the third biggest change is taking place, is that the organizational DNA is moving from manufacturing to services. As I told you, car companies were manufacturing companies. In a manufacturing company, the people working in the manufacturing setup rarely saw the actual physical customer. They made the customer to a certain specification. They made the car to a certain specification, shipped the car to a distributor, and the distributor basically sold the car to the customer. But now, because of the old sensors and IT embedded inside the car, this car company is able to stay in continuous contact with the customer. Now, this makes it a service business. It's very much similar to you go to a restaurant or you go to a hairdresser. The person serving you at the plate or the meal or in the hair service is observing you, observing your reactions, observing your taste, listening to your feedback, and suggesting what you can order, suggesting what kind of a hairstyle you can draw. And the same idea of providing services based on interaction with the customer is now possible in a car, which previously was not possible. Now, I can tell you that the DNA of a car company to move from manufacturing to services is like a 360-degree shift, a 180-degree shift. It's a massive shift because the whole organization is not designed to do that. So fundamentally, you have to create the right kind of a culture to make it much more customer interactive, much more customer centric. Now, if you think about competition, you're having, of course, traditional players, but you're having a whole bunch of new entrants enter the scene. People are now trying to discover what does electric car look like. Yes, Tesla is certainly a leader, but Tesla is not the only one. There are electric car companies coming in China, in India, in other parts of the world, and they are trying to, in fact, discover what does this new digitally enhanced car company and the car service look like. And you, in fact, even have tech companies, Google and all, entering this whole space. So for a car organization, you have a completely different landscape right now to deal with. Imagine if your competitor historically was Ford and GM, and now your competitor becomes Apple and Google. And that's a very, very different kind of a competitor. And most car companies don't even have the software DNA to be able to compete with these new players. And let me sort of just give the last point out here is that if you think about supply chains, car companies have historically spent a lot of time and effort on building supply chains. So they have built supply chains. They have, controlled the supply chains, and often the supply chains, they control the entire supply chain. And they had tier one suppliers, tier two suppliers. They could dominate the tier one, tier two suppliers and say, you have to, give this kind of a quality delivery. You have to actually manage this price, and they could dominate the entire supply chain. Now, as you look at the service-based world, a car company has to work with Amazon, has to work with Spotify, has to work with Google, has to work with Apple. And these ecosystem players cannot be dominated that easily. A car company cannot dominate Google, cannot dominate Apple. These are multi-trillion dollar capitalization companies. So they are very, very powerful companies, and the balance of power in the supply chain also has shifted. So what you start seeing is that the partnership moving from supply chain dominance to ecosystem membership is a very different mindset too for these companies to be, in fact, focusing on. So let me come back to the main panel and essentially, just summarize some of the thoughts. So if you just add these various dimensions of change, what you see is that a traditional industry that was very hardware based, that had for years, decades, built its competence on manufacturing, on engines, on mechanical design, and an industry in which they control the whole supply chain, suddenly now has to deal with a completely different environment. A different environment in which the customer demand has shifted, the core technology has shifted, the manufacturing DNA has shifted to a service DNA. The whole supply chain has given way to a ecosystem kind of situation. And of course, other aspects out here which make the entire transformation a very significant one. So I think this is just a small flavor of the kind of change happening. And of course, if you go to other information-based businesses like in music or like in finance or like in education, you'll find other more dramatic changes happening. But the car industry is a good example of the kind of digital transformation that is happening around us. And I think, what I hope you will learn from a program like this Cornell Digital Leaders Program is how to understand this change, how to react to it, how to, in fact, prepare your own organization for winning in this digital revolution, because this is not a one-time process. This is going to continue. The exponential curve is going on, and this is going to continue every X number of years. So this is a dramatic shift in the mindset of the organization, and I believe that this program will make you better prepared for surviving and thriving in that new shift. John, over to you for questions or other kinds of interactions here.
Professor, hi. We have one question from UAE, Dina Al Mansouri. She asks, how do companies manage liabilities with self-driven cars in case of accidents?
Yeah. So it's a very good question you're asking, Dina, about regulation in general. So regulation in general is lagging behind the whole digital progress. And I think, what you saw happening at least in Silicon Valley is that for a long time, regulators and government had the attitude that, we don't regulate the tech industry too much. And if you regulate them too much, you'll somehow spoil this innovation magic happening in Silicon Valley. So there was a very strong tendency of letting them be and letting them innovate to their own freedom. Now, what has happened, of course, is that people realize in the tech world that, the impact that Facebook and Google and Amazon are having is not necessarily always a positive one. So now what you see is the much more pressure in government towards regulation. And people are coming and saying, well, we need to regulate them. You see, for example, the Federal Trade Commission in the US, they have put 32-year-old Lina Khan. She's very much vocal against the antitrust issues in Amazon as the chair of that. So what you're seeing is that regulation is coming in. How the regulation will actually work out remains to be seen. And the specific question you're asking about liability in terms of self-driven cars, I think, again, it's a gray area. So there's no clear, directions in which way it should go. But I think in general, the feeling today is that with the human in the loop, the human has to take the liability of the situation. So responsibility has to lie with the human. Now, if you don't have a humans in the loop, where you have completely, autonomous cars driving around and a completely anonymous cars, has an accident, that's an interesting question. Who's liable? Is it the company that makes the cars? And you have the situations also in other domains. In Paris, for example, you have many of the metro lines are completely independent run. There's no driver in the metro lines. And so, and metro lines in a crowded city could also have accidents. So, people are following guidelines and following regulations out here, but I think this is an area that is changing and will keep on changing in the future.
We have a question from Fernandez. Professor, you mentioned about the car industry, the automobile industry. He asks us, which industry do you think is best at handling disruption so far, and why?
So I don't think it is any one industry per se. I think it's more a leadership issue. So you can ask, which leaders are better at handling disruption. So because to handle disruption, and this is what I did not cover today, but I will cover in the session, is that you need strong leadership to be able to change the organization upside down. So let's take a car company. It has to change completely upside down to compete with Tesla in the new environment. And so that's not an incremental change. That's a dramatic change. And for that, you need a strong leader at the top who can drive that change. So I think it's less, so all sectors are going through the change process, but in my view, it is more a question of not sectors, but more leaders in sectors who will drive changes successfully. And that's one reason why you'll find that some companies will do better than others, because the leadership will be more successful in doing the changes.
Thanks, Prof. And there seems to be an eternal question. Would technology reduce the human factor? Any comment on that? I'm sure.
Yeah. So I teach a course on artificial intelligence, and And what you're seeing is that even the AI systems and the ability to interact with people is changing and evolving. Okay, so I don't know how many of you have seen this movie, Her. Okay, there's a very nice movie, Her, that talks about how this man falls in love with the operating system, and how the operating system actually is forming a relationship with many other people at the same time. And by the way, that is not science fiction. Right now in China, there is a software program, a bot that was created by Microsoft China called Xiaoce. Okay, Xiaoce. So just search for it, you'll find it. And Xiaoce is a bot that actually has a girlfriend-like relationship with 600 million Chinese males. Okay, so 600 million Chinese males interact with the bot, confide in the bot, and the bot is able to interact with them and emotionally achieve a connection with them. And this is not just a fun thing on the side. In psychological counseling, so let's say, for example, teenagers, and a lot of teenagers go through crises. You have bots that actually are very effective at counseling teenagers. Why? Because they often have crises in the middle of the night. They often don't trust talking to the parents or teachers because they feel judged, and they often feel more comfortable talking to a bot. So I think this ability of machines to understand and interact with human beings with high empathy is improving continuously. And so we should not think that this is, science fiction will never happen. And the best proof of that is, if 600 million Chinese males can treat a bot as a girlfriend, now that's the future.
Very, very interesting, Prof. A completely different question. Any insight on blockchain technology? This is asked. Shiv Prakash asked this question.
Yeah, it's a big question, so I know I can't give a proper answer. Clearly, we'll cover some parts of that in the program. But blockchain is, of course, a key technology. It's for providing higher security in maintaining various distributed ledgers. I think the more important thing is how the blockchains are being applied in various domains, whether it's in digital currencies or other kinds of supply chain management or so on. So blockchain as a technology is quite a solid technology that is present. There are some issues around real-time performance and so on, but that we are trying to solve that through other kinds of heuristics. But it's being applied in many domains, and Bitcoin is only one part of that. There are many other domains where blockchains are being used, and I think you'll see more of that being used in the future.
Thanks so much, Prof. I think so. 30 minutes is done. Folks, we have your questions. We'll attempt to respond to each one of them. And if you have more questions and if you want to interact with Professor Dutta, you will have to join the program. So thanks so much again, Professor Dutta. Thank you. Thanks for your time. Thank you all. Wishing you all a good evening. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor.
Bye-bye.